Yes, it's Danny. Hello, everyone. It's Danny. Just me right now. We have a bonus episode for you this week. There is no Danny in it. There is no Gabe in it. Solely David, and he is interviewing Olaf Storbeck. Olaf actually recently broke a story regarding Wirecard, which is a business in Germany very similar to PayPal. It's like a processing service. You all know PayPal. You all know what that stuff does. And this was a huge deal because it was a fraud essentially over there. That was like a big, like, accounting fraud. Apparently, according to David, the largest accounting fraud in post-war German history. So that's after World War II. It's more formally known as the Wirecard scandal. Very, very compelling stuff, and just the amount of fraud that was happening was sort of unheard of, and also very goofy. There's a lot of weird characters in this. There's actors, there's potential corpses, or alleged corpses. there's all kinds of stuff in it, and without further ado, we'll just let David and Olaf get right into it.
Well, everyone, I am here with Olaf Storbeck. He is the correspondent for the Financial Times in Frankfurt. Olaf, how are you doing today?
Yeah, not too bad. How are you?
Doing all right. So I heard about this story with Wirecard, which from what I understand is kind of like a German PayPal for the American audience. Is that an accurate way of describing it?
Well, I mean, that's how it used to be described. Now it's more apt to describe it as the German Enron, but yeah.
That's not really a transition that any company wants to hear.
That's right.
Yeah.
But it's definitely one of Germany's, or probably the biggest post-war accounting scandal in Germany.
Wow.
One of the biggest in Europe.
Wow. And you say post-war because pre-war there was just a lot of accounting fraud, or is that just a
standard metric?
It's pretty difficult to compare kind of corporate scandals in the 30s or 20s with the current state of affairs. But I mean, there were several big banking fraud in Germany in the 1920s, late 1920s. So it's quite difficult to compare the magnitude. So to be on safe ground, I think it's fair to say it's kind of, in modern history, definitely the biggest accounting fraud in Germany.
Wow. And, this, for readers in there, this story I've been covering, I've been looking at some of Olaf's reporting on it, and this has not, when you think of accounting fraud, this isn't necessarily the most glamorous type of white-collar crime, but this involves some pretty amazing details. There's a pornography transactions business in the Philippines. There is something called Project Panther. There is attempts to take over Deutsche Bank, which is one of the largest international banks in the world. So this is a fascinating story. But to start off, Olaf, can you tell me, how did you first come into this story? Just tell us your first exposure to this.
Well, I mean, the Financial Times, two colleagues of mine based in London, Dan McCrum and Paul Murphy, started to report about accounting irregularities and Wirecard's numbers just not matching up a few years back. So in 2015, Dan started this series called House of Wirecards. Back then, it was on FT Alphaville, a financial blog, which is run by the FT, where he dug deep into details of Wirecard's accounting, and described many things that didn't make any sense. And from then on, we faced significant opposition and counteraction by Wirecard, who strongly disputed all of the allegations and question, but never really properly answered the questions then rose.
Right.
And then later on, he got in touch with some whistleblowers at Wirecard who provided him with documents showing that in Singapore, where the Asian business, or part of Wirecard's Asian business were based, they were cooking the books, and then he for almost 2 years spent more or less all his time getting to the bottom of this. And I will, as the Frankfurt correspondent, was basically, my job was to liaise with with the company. I mean, it was one of Germany's 30 largest companies in 2018. Wirecard became a member of the DAX, Germany's blue chip index, replacing Commerzbank. And that my role basically was trying to do normal corporate reporting about Wirecard, and also do the reporting about the escalating conflict between Wirecard, German regulators, and the FT, which as it were a consequence of that reporting.
So then let's look at it from when you joined. You joined the story. There was a very explosive story that came out late last year, from what I understand. That there's evidence of that October of last year, that Wirecard fraudulently inflated its sales and profits. Can you describe that story?
That story in October was basically the final straw, which really broke the camel's back, if you may say so. So in this story, we then looked at, had access to internal client documents of Wirecard, a list of 34 clients, which Wirecard was claiming to serve via an outsourced operations based in Dubai. And it turned out that of those 34 clients, 20 didn't exist or had never heard about Wirecard. So then, in a very meticulous work, tried to chase down those clients which were listed in this internal document, and found out that most of those companies had actually never done any business with Wirecard.
And some of them didn't exist at all.
Yes, some of them had gone out of business, and previously some didn't exist at all, and others said they'd never heard about Wirecard, and they'd never heard about this outsourcing partner Wirecard was using in Dubai. Wirecard itself disputed all of this. They said they accused us of using fraudulent documents. At the same time, raised a lawsuit against us, against the FT, accusing us of breaching corporate secrets, which is a bit at odds with each other. So either the documents are fraudulent, or you're breaching corporate secret, but it's impossible to do both.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
And then the FT also published the actual documents. So unlike in previous instances where we just reported about the evidence, this time it was made available on the internet. So basically, the rest of the world could take its own. Could look at the document and base its own opinion, and this then led to quite a significant. I mean, Wirecard downplayed all this, disputed it, said it's all wrong. And it's nothing new in it, but the pressure internally from the supervisory board at Wirecard, which for a long time just didn't do anything, but at that point had started. A few new people had joined the supervisory board, and and were taking the company to task, the management to task, at least to some degree. They launched and they mandated KPMG, one of the big four accountancies, with basically a special audit into Wirecard's accounts, and basically asked KPMG to look at these allegations, which then triggered a 6 month long investigation. That was basically the beginning of the end of Wirecard's fraud.
And at this point, why hire if there's evidence of widespread accounting fraud, which is basically defrauding investors, right? That's the core of the crime, is falsely inflating their revenues and their how much business they have, and which is wouldn't that spark the scrutiny of German regulators, or were they acting in tandem with the KPMG audit?
Well, I mean, the behavior of German regulators is quite outrageous in many ways, because they basically didn't properly investigate these allegations.
Really?
So the German, I mean, to some degree, the whole saga highlighted significant shortcomings in Germany's legal framework with regard to such kind of balance sheet manipulations and accounting fraud, because
really?
there's a body which is basically mandated to look at to double check corporate accounts, but this body doesn't have the resources and doesn't really have the remit to dig into potential accounting fraud, turning to the company, look at the documents, and then look if everything is in line with current accounting standards. So but they don't question if the documents are genuine in themselves or not. German regulators in 2019 basically commissioned such an investigation into Wirecard by this accounting watchdog. The accounting watchdog dragged its feet for many months. After KPMG was commissioned by Wirecard, the accounting watchdog basically said, okay, we will wait for KPMG's results before we carry on with our own investigation. And up to this day, they haven't tabled their own report into Wirecard. And I mean, KPMG, just to give you an idea of the kind of order of magnitude of basically how inept this accounting watchdog in Germany is. It's a company. It's a basically public-private partnership. It's not even a public body with investigative power, but it's a public-private partnership which has like 15 employees and an annual budget of 6 million euros. And the KPMG investigation into Wirecard, which ended in a bit inconclusive way, which we can talk about this later maybe, but KPMG was having like 40 people on this project, and the costs are up to 10 million euros just for this one special audit. So which shows how completely out of proportion this accounting watchdog's powers were, and
so that name law, that regulator is that BaFin?
The BaFin is basically the regulator which commissioned this accounting watchdog. The accounting watchdog is called the Financial Reporting Enforcement Panel, FREP. And one of the regulatory or political consequences of this whole scandal is that this body will basically be dissolved, and that BaFin will get its own power and competencies to launch its own investigations right from the start. Because under current German law, BaFin can only take its own look either if the company wouldn't cooperate with this reporting panel, or if the reporting panel comes to a conclusion and BaFin doesn't like or isn't convinced by the conclusion. But as long as this process is ongoing, for the time being, BaFin doesn't have any real competencies. Another problem in the whole saga was that Wirecard wasn't treated. I mean, Wirecard is a payments processor. They were basically processing credit card payments between merchants and clients, making sure that when you pay with your Visa or Amazon or Mastercard, the merchant actually gets its money. But it wasn't treated as a financial services company and wasn't properly regulated by BaFin. It was treated as a technology company, and only Wirecard's bank, which is a relatively tiny subsidiary of Wirecard, was directly regulated by BaFin, and later on, it became clear that nobody really, no authority in Germany was doing any anti-money laundering supervision of Wirecard AG, which and there was a lot of suspicion and allegations about potential anti-money laundering violations within Wirecard's business, but no German authority ever took a look at this.
Wow. So in the if it's regulated as a technology company, then would there be some sort of due diligence? But I assume that because it's not a financial institution, they're not going to be doing these sorts of anti-money laundering procedures in the same.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Scrupulous way.
it's a different body which, in theory, would be responsible to monitor that. It's a regional authority in Bavaria, which doesn't have the power and the competencies and the know-how to properly monitor a globally acting a credit card company which is operating globally.
Wow.
And the third, or another institution which really only woke up very late was the Criminal Prosecution Office in Munich, where Wirecard is based, and they for a long time said, "Oh, we can only launch a criminal investigation if we have sufficient evidence that either there was crime conducted on German soil or crime by German citizens," and they for a long time just said, well, despite all these allegations and all these questions raised by whistleblowers, they didn't see the case to start a criminal investigation. And that was only started basically after Wirecard said, oh, by the way, 1.9 billion in cash in Asia never existed. And after the CEO was resigned. And
Wow.
that gave the people basically orchestrating this fraud quite a lot of time to probably tamper with evidence and get money out of the way. And one of the key persons, Jan Marsalek, the number 2 at Wirecard, was able to abscond, and he's still on the run. Nobody knows where he is.
Fascinating character. I'd love to return to Marsalek individually down the road. And so, just really quick on the German criminal office, the criminal prosecution of Munich, they needed Wirecard. Is it a German company?
Yes, it's incorporated in Germany. It's listed on the German stock market,
and its headquarters is in Germany as well.
Yeah, its headquarters is in a Munich suburb.
And so, despite the fact that there are whistleblower complaints going back with your colleague from 2015, or he's studying the accounting practices, and then whistleblowers start coming forward after that, as far back as 2015, the criminal prosecution office in Munich still decides that that's insufficient.
Yes, because for a long time, the allegations didn't really, the misconduct wasn't located or wasn't done in Munich, but it was allegedly done in Asia, in Singapore, in Dubai, and basically jurisdictions outside Germany. That was always the way, the key argument of Munich prosecutors, why they said that they are not able to launch an investigation, which is quite outrageous to some degree. I mean, the other thing is that I mean, we started about Dan's first big article, which basically eventually led to this KPMG investigation, was published in January 2019. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, I was calling up all these all these different bodies we've discussed earlier, and asking them, so are you doing anything? And everyone kind of was finger pointing to somebody else. And my impression at that point was, well, as long as you get the signature by your auditors, who basically, as long as the auditors sign off your books, you can get away with quite a lot. And there aren't many institutions around in Germany which can uncover accounting fraud at an early stage. And I mean the whole, which we haven't mentioned so far, what the other really outrageous thing is that BaFin, while and the Munich prosecutors, while not really properly investigating the allegations, BaFin filed a criminal complaint against two of my colleagues, Dan McCrum in London and Stefania Palmer based in Singapore, who did the original reporting in January, accusing them or suspecting them of cooperating with short sellers and basically investigating potential market manipulations by my two colleagues, which is quite a.
Do they have any basis for those sorts of allegations?
Not really. I mean, Wirecard basically presented so-called, in inverted commas, facts or evidence to Munich prosecutors and to BaFin, suggesting that those that there was collusion between FT journalists and short sellers, but this was all fabricated, and we now know that. We don't know it, but it's highly likely that Wirecard, I mean, then obviously before running these stories, put detailed questions to Wirecard. So Wirecard was aware of the kind of reporting which was coming. And the big suspicion is that they leaked this stuff to short sellers, because we knew even before our article was published, Dan and Paul Murphy, the head of the investigative team in London, were aware of leaks and were aware that basically in the London short selling scene, people were talking about upcoming reports by the FT on allegations against Wirecard, and some people were taking big short positions in the run-up to these articles.
Wow.
But and Wirecard basically suggested this was coming from us, which it wasn't. And the only other party involved and aware of these coming reports was Wirecard. And one I mean, piece of evidence which strongly suggests this is that specifically London short sellers basically were saying, oh, there's on this specific day at 1 p.m. The FT is going to run a negative story about Wirecard, and 1 p.m. was the deadline then put to Wirecard to answer these questions. As you may know, we these kind of specific dates are, especially with a story, publication dates aren't discussed internally beforehand. So for instance, I didn't know when the story was coming, and only like a handful of people, Dan, Paul, and the editors, basically knew about the precise timing, which wasn't 1 p.m. That was the deadline given to Wirecard to respond to our queries.
Oh, that sounds inculpatory, I guess, to say the least.
Yeah, yes, and these kind of short positions in the run-up to the article, then by BaFin and by Munich prosecutors, was basically these positions were seen as an evidence, or as at least basis for suspicion that that there was market manipulation potentially by our colleagues, which I mean. Only like a few weeks ago, like 2 months after the insolvency of Wirecard, the case against Dan and Stefania, against my two colleagues, was dropped by Munich prosecutors. So it was ongoing, even quite a while after the company had collapsed.
I mean, if it's true that they were either setting up this short selling kind of operation, they would be betting against themselves.
But I mean, as we know now, this whole thing, and it was really a criminal enterprise, and it was run right from the top. So I mean, the number 2 is on the run.
Yeah.
Several other, including the CEO, the former CEO Markus Braun, are in custody. But we have to admit, Markus Braun is denying all wrongdoing and says he wasn't aware of anything, which is, I find it personally hard to believe, but that's his line of defense. There's one person who run basically this operations in Dubai has turned himself to Munich prosecutors and now is trying to become a crown witness and basically trying to cooperate with prosecutors to limit his own penalty.
Right. No, I mean it's not. But what for me is what you're trying to say is that it'd be fitting for them to do something like that because it's like from some of the details that they're doing. I mean, they're from your most recent reporting on it, they were doing things like manipulating and lying about having a bank in an account in Singapore and then moving that to the Philippines before it was too late, before Ernst and Young could get there, or EY, but whatever, yeah. And then they also when people were following up, when I think it was KPMG was following up in the Philippines, they were even allegedly going further in some of Ernst and Young was looking at their Philippine scrutiny, and you said that there was a suspicion that they could have been paying actors to pretend to be employees and even potentially have, yeah. I mean, so them short selling their own operation would be fitting with some of their other
behavior, which is more proven.
I mean, another thing which they did, and I mean the suspicion of Munich prosecutors, as we know from sources, is basically going beyond what you earlier described in them trying to basically inflate the balance sheet to make the company look more attractive to investors. What they also did was raising a lot of debt from banks and external parties, and then giving hundreds of millions of loans to opaque business partners in Asia, where it's not really clear what the purpose of those loans was, and it potentially was just a means to get to ship quite a lot of money out of the company. And they also did a very overpriced acquisition in India some years back, which was one of the most outrageous instances that led to suspicions and to significant and ongoing questions about what this management was doing. So they basically bought an Indian payments company for some 300 million euros, I think 340 million euros from the top of my head, which just 6 weeks earlier was sold for a fraction of this sum to the entity which Wirecard bought it from.
Wow.
And Wirecard bought it from a funds from a Mauritius-based entity where nobody knows who the ultimate beneficial owner was. And the big suspicion obviously is that some people involved in this deal on Wirecard side basically bought the company, this Indian company, paid like 34 million euros for it, and then via this middleman, via this Mauritius-based entity, sold it on to Wirecard for 10 times this money, and in this way created basically, so I sidelined like more than 300 million euros.
I hadn't heard about this Indian payments company. Do you know what year was that?
It was 2015. Yeah, there was an ongoing. I mean, the guys who sold the Indian payments company for 34 million euros were suing Wirecard, but they lost. The case was struck down in London just a few weeks before Wirecard, even after earlier this year, let's say.
Going back to the timeline from late last year to this year, they had there was the report that came out from you all. Was it you all that alleged that you just could not find where this 1.9 billion euro on its balance sheet was, or was that somebody else?
Eventually, it was EY, the Wirecard accountants,
Yeah.
who, when looking at when going through the 2019 results and auditing them, eventually grew increasingly suspicious about this part of the business. So we should probably I mean, it's such a complex topic, and I'm not sure if listeners can follow here, because there are so many moving parts. But we should maybe look at the KPMG special audit first, because that was quite remarkable in itself, and in a way our reporting led to the KPMG audit. The KPMG audit led to EY doing its job properly for 2019, which then eventually uncovered the whole fraud. So after the report by Dan in October about basically suggesting that quite a large amount of Wirecard business didn't really exist, and the customers which Wirecard claimed were responsible for hundreds of millions of revenue apparently didn't exist. KPMG got this mandate from the supervisory board, basically was promised access to all documents they needed, and Wirecard committed itself to publish the report afterwards. And then KPMG started to work on this, and basically was stonewalled by the company's management, right, left, and center. And so they didn't get the documents they needed. The meetings were cancelled, and Wirecard's excuse always was, look, we are dealing with these outsourcing partners in Asia. It's not, which we don't really control, and those companies are not really willing to cooperate with the special audit. So we are not responsible for this. It's all these kind of third-party outsourcing partners who we don't really have a lot of control over, which in a way is obviously quite ridiculous, because these alleged outsourcing partners were responsible for half of Wirecard's total revenue, and basically all of Wirecard's operating profit, as we know now, which that wasn't disclosed to the public at all. It was only then, earlier in 2019, basically disclosing that these opaque business partners basically existed, and that they were responsible for a large share of the operating profit.
Wow. And so they also, right around this time when the KPMG audit, there was discussions of Wirecard buying Deutsche Bank?
Well, internal discussions. So Wirecard had this idea and commissioned McKinsey to do a kind of scenario analysis and basically to develop an equity story for a potential takeover of Deutsche Bank by Wirecard. I mean, at the time, the market capitalization of both Wirecard and Deutsche Bank were roughly equal. So both were worth about 14 billion euros on the stock market, because I mean, Deutsche Bank sits on 1.4 trillion of assets, but had because of all its own problems, to profitability and legacy issues, litigation issues, and all the rest of it, was only trading at 20% of its book value, and on a big discount. And with the benefit of hindsight, some advisors who were close to Wirecard but not involved in this fraud basically suggested that this potential takeover of Deutsche Bank in a way was seen as one way out of this fraud scheme. Because I mean, if you run a big fraud scheme, which by the end of 2019 you have close to 2 billion of cash on your accounts which don't really exist, you need to find some kind of exit strategy sooner or later, because I mean, it's clear that such a fraud can't go on forever. As we know, I mean, every Ponzi scheme is going to collapse at one point.
Right.
And what way out? If Wirecard had been able to basically acquire Deutsche Bank, paying with its own shares, which were grossly overvalued, as we know now, but back then were trading on multiples that relative to payment to other payment companies were relatively low even. So if they managed to get a clear bill of health from KPMG, and then basically the share price goes through the roof, they could have tried to acquire Deutsche Bank, and then with the post-merger impairment charges somehow explain away those missing 2 billion.
That would just come across as a transaction cost that just it kind of got lost and just kind of sweep it under the rug.
Exactly.
I mean, literally. I mean, that would be a laundering of this missing amount of money.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, and Deutsche Bank has its fair share of its own problems.
Right, and so does McKinsey.
At the same time, is kind of systemically really important for the German economy and as well for the global economy. So if you imagine this deal had happened and then the fraud had been exposed at Wirecard, we would be talking about a scandal which would be even orders of magnitude bigger than the scandal we are looking at the moment, because that then could have created a kind of instability for the whole European or potentially global financial system with Deutsche Bank.
That's amazing. I mean, that's really just like what it reminds me of is if, like, Enron had bought Citibank in 2006.
Exactly.
And
I mean, for the pity obviously for Wirecard's creditors and also for Wirecard investors is that after the insolvency, after filing for insolvency, it's very difficult to sue Wirecard for market manipulation and for damages as an investor, because there's just nothing left. But had they merged with Deutsche Bank, you could then Deutsche Bank's assets would be there as well. And Deutsche Bank would potentially be squashed by this kind of litigation wave into Wirecard. So I mean, it's a scenario which, if you think about it for longer, it can really give you nightmares.
Wow, yeah, that is kind of hard to believe. And considering all of the other litigation issues that Deutsche Bank is encountering with some of its own chicanery, to put it lightly, it would be a huge blow to the bank as well.
And that was so. This just to finish this thought. The internal code name of this takeover attempt of Wirecard, of Deutsche Bank by Wirecard, was Project Panther, and they had and the interesting thing is that we obtained a slide deck by McKinsey, which was dated November 15th. So that these plans or discussions were ongoing just after the KPMG had started to dig into Wirecard's account.
And so, but McKinsey could not be held liable for.
Yeah, well, I mean, they are in a way they are just guns for hire, aren't they? So if you ask them, if Wirecard had asked them to come up with an equity story of a takeover of Tesla, probably they'd come up with a slide deck as well. But I mean, sure, I mean, McKinsey doesn't play any role in the fraud scheme. And also,
do you think that they knew about the fraud scheme?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the other thing which is interesting, the supervisory board, after some new people, I mean, the supervisory board of Wirecard, we have this 2-tier system in Germany. We maybe should explain this to global listeners briefly.
Sure.
So we have this in Germany. You have the management board, with basically the executive directors are part of the management board, and then you have the supervisory board, which only consists of non-executive directors, which task is basically to monitor the management board. And for a long time, and normally of big German listed corporations, the supervisory boards have like at least 10 members. Normally you're talking about 20 members and quite a few subcommittees, like an auditing committee and and several other committees. And Wirecard, until early 2018, didn't have any committees in its supervisory board, and the supervisory board was just consisting of 4 people.
Oh my God.
And those people were kind of all white, male, and stale guys who were on the supervisory board for like close to a decade each.
Was that Matthias?
Yes, I mean Wolf Matthias was the chairman. It's an old, I mean it's a former banker who has turned 75 years old this year, I think, and he was the chairman for just about a decade, and only in 2018 there was some pressure from investors as Wirecard had become so big and so significant on the stock market to basically enlarge the supervisory board and get some external people in. And that happened in 2018, and these new people basically commissioned McKinsey with a different project, namely to look at Wirecard's compliance functions and control functions. And McKinsey's verdict was devastating, basically saying the Wirecard doesn't have any working control environment internally.
Oh my God.
Interestingly enough, then it wasn't McKinsey which got commissioned to come up to develop a scheme and to implement control functions, but it was PwC, another Big Four accountancy, which at that point already was also the auditor of Wirecard Bank. So which probably wasn't. You might wonder why they commissioned somebody who was also looking at the bank to come up with these control functions.
What would be so strange about having an account audit from 2 different parts of the business?
The problem is that, I mean, you have this in a way this conflict of interest if you give advice to a company and audit them at the same time.
Oh, advice versus auditing. Oh wow, that is, yeah, I see what you're saying.
I mean, with regard to EY, the main auditor of Wirecard Group, Wirecard AG, there wasn't any, as far as we know, there wasn't any advisory services provided to Wirecard. But you had PwC, which was the new in 2018. It was already clear that they will be the new auditors of Wirecard Bank, and then they were also given this advisory mandate for with regard to Wirecard's control functions. I mean, they tried to fix this by carving out Wirecard Bank from the control project and the compliance project, but it's an odd solution as well. I mean, sources suggested to me that McKinsey just was too expensive, and PwC just made a more competitive offer for this advisory project. But it's still odd that McKinsey basically came up with the assessment, and then somebody else got the project to implement a better system.
Wow.
And this project actually was never fully executed because Wirecard went bust before PwC was done with it.
So moving beyond the corporate supervisory oversight and compliance structure, let's look into what's going on in Asia, and with one of this Marcelic second in command. So first off, what it looks like is that there was it's KPMG is asking for what's going on, and for years it looks like Wirecard had been saying to EY that cash was in escrow in the Singapore OCBC.
Yes, I think we should probably make sense to put this into a slightly broader context. So Wirecard always said, and which is in itself a plausible argument, that in legislations where it didn't have its own licenses to basically operate payments, they were cooperating with outsourcing partners which which had these local licenses. The term they used was third-party acquiring partners, TPA. That's how shorthand for it. And what Wirecard never really properly disclosed was that these so-called TPA business, so basically the business they allegedly outsourced and which wasn't under Wirecard's direct control, accounted for half of the overall business and for basically all of its operating profits, while the remaining core business of Wirecard was actually loss-making, as we know now. That was never disclosed to the outside world.
It's a huge, that's a huge misleading the public. That's
definitely, yes, definitely. And so for the TPA business, they basically said, okay, Wirecard needs to protect these TPA partners, its outsourcing partners, from the risks that are associated with these kind of payment processing things. So, for instance, if somebody pays with a fraudulent credit card and the whole thing gets recharged, the TPA partner doesn't want to bear the risk, and hence Wirecard had to provide cash basically to protect these partners from this, to shield its partners from these risks. And this money was they told its accountant was sitting on escrow account in Asia at OCBC, one of Singapore's biggest banks. And the weird thing, which was always confusing when I learned about the structure which I found always confusing, was that at the same time, this escrow accounts not only had the purpose of shielding these business partners from this risk allegedly, but they were also used to basically clear the fees Wirecard was supposed to be getting from the TPA partners for this whole business. So basically the TPA partners paid Wirecard a fee, and that's how Wirecard allegedly generated revenue and generated profit from this business.
So the money is allegedly both protecting the third party and also is a way for the third party to collect money from Wirecard.
No, to pay money to Wirecard. So basically, those TPAs basically were contractually obliged to pay Wirecard to basically fees because Wirecard basically handed over business to them.
I see.
These TPAs collected fees from the other parties involved in these card processing business. And a fraction or some part of this fees ended up at Wirecard supposedly, but those fees weren't paid to Wirecard accounts in Germany, but they were also paid on these escrow accounts in Singapore.
Okay, I see now. So
the weak link and basically the core of this fraud scheme was that these escrow accounts, or Wirecard told its auditor EY that these escrow accounts weren't held by Wirecard, but were held in the name of a trustee who was based in Singapore, and this person basically had a banking relationship with OCBC allegedly. So when double checking, Shan, as everyone calls this.
Good. Nice.
Citadel was the name of the company providing these trustee services.
Yep.
Allegedly. So Wirecard basically didn't have access to the or told EY, look, because those are not our accounts, so we don't have access to the account documents. We can't go to OCBC to get a balance sheet confirmation. But they basically received these balance sheet confirmations allegedly from the trustee, and handed over only these documents which were basically issued by the trustee to EY, which EY then accepted as proof of this money on these escrow accounts. So and this. There are two problems with this. First of all, obviously, accounting 101 would be only to rely on documents the account himself obtained from the bank rather than from a third party.
Right.
And the other question is, even if you assume for a second that this whole structure I've just discussed had been real. I mean, we now know it was pure fantasy. Didn't exist in that way. But even if it had been real, you could ask, why is this money on these escrow accounts counted as cash on Wirecard's balance sheet? because I mean, first of all, the money was purpose bound. It was supposed to shield those TPAs from the risk related to these transactions.
Right.
And there are significant doubt, even if, sorry, I mean, we know now the money never existed and these trustee accounts never existed,
Yeah.
as Wirecard described. But had they existed, Wirecard couldn't have used it as cash without penalties and basically instantly accessing it. So and I think that. And that was one issue raised by KPMG. I mean, even KPMG wasn't aware in its special audit that these accounts wasn't existing at all. They said, well, look, the documents we obtained by Wirecard aren't good enough. And we can't prove that the money exists, but we also can't prove that the money doesn't exist and that these accounts don't exist. But I mean, even if everything had been as Wirecard explained to EY, why was this counted as cash on Wirecard's account? And also, why were those revenues allegedly generated by these outsourcing partners basically fully consolidated with Wirecard AG, which and we know now that there weren't any detailed transaction records, and it was all Wirecard received on a quarterly basis, received an Excel spreadsheet from these TPAs. From these outsourcing partners, summarizing the transaction volume. So it was, and this was basically exchanged by email for a company which claimed to operate with the top-notch IT infrastructure. So it was all a big joke, and you can really ask why this didn't raise an eyebrow at EY at an earlier point.
You know, sometimes when people speak with enough confidence and they say something thin to brush it over, people will just say, oh, that makes sense. And then they won't really look into the details. But then once you look into the details, as you're saying, you see all these contradictions.
Yeah. So, and what happened in basically why Wirecard's management was fantasizing about taking over Deutsche Bank in November, and while KPMG had started to look into the Asian accounts, KPMG pretty early on told Wirecard, look, we need to access the original bank documents, and all the documents you are showing us aren't good enough. And basically, the mastermind of the fraud, we at the moment, it's pretty likely who those people were, but they haven't been convicted in court, so we can't say who it was in person.
Allegedly,
But I mean, those people, the masterminds, knew, well, look, this is going to explode because we have this ongoing audit. They want to see the documents. We don't have these documents. How get we out of this the situation? And what they did after 2 months, Jan Marsalek then went to EY and KPMG in January 2020 and said, oh, look, we have a problem in Singapore. The trustee, which so far was working for us, has basically abruptly terminated the business relationship with us. This person isn't responding to any queries from us anymore, and hence we had to look for a new trustee and went to different banks in Asia, where these escrow accounts now have been relocated to. And as we know now, that was only became aware in June actually. We are talking about 2 banks in the Philippines and a Philippines-based lawyer who was appointed, or who Wirecard in January said was the new trustee. And it's quite interesting what happened then. So KPMG then said to Wirecard, fine, show us the documents, show us the contract with the new trustee in the Philippines, show us the background checks you did on this person. And it turned out that in late January, there wasn't any contractual record between the trustee, who was allegedly overseeing 1.9 billion in corporate funds for Wirecard.
Is Mark Tolentino?
Yes, this Mark Tolentino guy, and there was only kind of a letter which was signed by Wirecard's different partners, but there wasn't any formal decision by Wirecard's management board. And I mean, but the company still claimed to have basically moved 1.9 billion euros of cash to this person.
Wow. And Tolentino is alleging identity theft.
Yes,
He's alleging that
Tolentino is basically
yeah.
saying he was framed. He and the Philippine authorities are at the moment investigating his role and the role of other people. But Tolentino has been named in several auditing documents by KPMG and by EY. And Tolentino in March welcomed EY and KPMG auditors in his office together with Jan Marsalek, and Tolentino then went to the bank branches with KPMG and with EY and handed over these bank documentations of allegedly confirming the money on these accounts, which we know now were spurious.
And do you think that Tolentino had clean hands in this?
Oh, I can't say. I mean,
Yeah.
I can only describe. I don't want to second guess personal responsibilities here. I can just describe what we know from the auditing documents we've seen and from the other records we've seen and from sources.
And so they met. There was also another Filipino actor, Chris Bauer. Is that right?
Yes, I mean Chris Bauer. Here's that's another mind-boggling aspect of this whole saga. So Chris Bauer he's a German guy who was living in the Philippines for several years. He was also running a tour bus company for tourists, basically in the Philippines, which claims to be I think they claim to be the biggest tour bus company in the Philippines. And he was also running one of these three outsourcing partners, which was basically allegedly processing the credit card transactions on behalf of Wirecard. And his company, PayEasy, was responsible for several hundred millions of revenue and also quite a large chunk of Wirecard operating profit, on paper at least. It's quite unclear how much of this business was real and how much was invented, how much, if there was business, but which maybe didn't end up with Wirecard, with the proceeds didn't end up with Wirecard, but maybe potentially somewhere else.
And it was allegedly
anyway, to cut a long story short, this Mr. Bauer was registered dead a few weeks after Wirecard filed for its insolvency. He was only 40 years old. Allegedly, he died from sepsis and had a boil, and which then got infected and died in hospital, and allegedly was cremated within a few days after his death. And
PayEasy was also, his business was doing some more high risk, quote unquote, transactions. So things like some of Wirecard's transactions for pornography, for gambling.
They call it. They don't call it pornography. They call it adult entertainment.
Excuse me. Yeah, sorry.
No, and gaming. So pornography, gaming, and online betting stuff.
And so one of the third party, just to summarize really quickly, one of the third parties transacting with Wirecard was a German man named Chris Bauer, who was doing some of the adult entertainment, gambling, and gaming activity and transactions, and now he's dead.
Yes. Well, at least there's a death certificate issued for him on his name.
I see. There is a death certificate issued in his name. Okay.
And we also know that I think you can obtain a death certificate in the Philippines for something like $50, and a corpse costs you another $400. So the Philippines is one of the countries which are kind of the prime destination to fake your own death. One contact told me, he knows one person who actually died twice on the Philippines over the course of 10 years. We just don't know. I mean, we know that Chris Bauer's wife published his death on Facebook. There was a death notice published in a German newspaper by his family. So
Wow.
And his family, well, um, his parents talked to German media about his death, so they. And it's slightly. I mean, we don't have any evidence that this person didn't die, but given the circumstances, it's a highly unusual coincidence, to say the least.
Absolutely, and the fact that Marsalek is still missing, essentially.
Yes. I mean, he was last seen in Munich, basically on the day when Wirecard announced that EY wouldn't sign off its 2019 results, and he was suspended back then. That's also another funny story. After EY basically said, "Look, the bank documents, the banks in the Philippines told EY that the bank documents are spurious and that these accounts don't exist." The supervisory board. I mean, you would expect that the supervisory board at that point then fires the CEO and the guy responsible for the Asian operations, which was Marsalek. But they didn't fire the CEO, Marcus Brown, on that day, and they didn't even fire Marsalek. But Marsalek was only suspended for like 12 days until the end of June.
My God!
And he was seen in Wirecard's offices on the afternoon of that day, and has disappeared ever since. And there are different speculations. There was Bellingcat, this investigative portal, reporting he fled to Belarus. There are German outlets, media outlets, suggesting he then carried on to Russia, and might be hidden by. And Marsalek also had quite a lot of connections into the Secret Service world. So he had connections to the Austrian Secret Service and also potentially, most probably, to the Russian Secret Service. And there's this theory that he's now hidden by the Russian Secret Service somewhere close to Moscow. We don't have our own sourcing on this, but it's quite a story in many different ways. Yeah.
So after the KPMG and EY both are looking at this Filipino activity, and one of the banks in the Philippines says that these documents are spurious, and that's kind of the moment when Marsalek leaves. Is that what you said?
Yes, well, we're talking about he leaves basically 2 days after, or 1.5 days afterwards. So on June, we know from documents we've seen that on June 16th, the EY learned from the banks in the Philippines that those documents were spurious. Then told the supervisory board and the executive board and also Germany's financial regulators. And then for 1.5 days, there were frantic things going on behind the scenes. Wirecard, so Marsalek and Braun always said, "Oh, this is just a big misunderstanding. The money is there. It's all real. Don't worry. We'll sort it out." And then on June 18th, basically the last day when after Wirecard, the publication of Wirecard's accounts had been postponed for like 3 or 4 times. Normally Wirecard had been obliged to publish them by late April, by the end of April, and we are now in mid-June, end of June, and the 2019 results were still not published. That was basically the day when everything came to a close.
And leading up to that, there was allegations or there was suspicion that in some of the report that there were people who were posing as employees. They're asking for photos of identification of bank employees.
Yes. So what happened after? So in early March, basically EY and KPMG had visits set up in the Philippines where they met the new trustee Tolentino, where they also met. Went to the branches of those banks where the trustee accounts were allegedly held, talked to employees. Those employees actually handed over documents and told EY and KPMG, yeah, it's all fine and the money is held on behalf of Wirecard. After the KPMG report was published and all these questions were raised, EY then, which was still auditing the 2019 result of Wirecard, took a closer look. And because of the pandemic then being at full swing, they couldn't travel to the Philippines anymore, and they did video calls with the banks and asked the bank employees to basically show their identities to the camera. And then while these calls were ongoing, EY was starting to check out these people on social media and couldn't find any of them, which is quite unusual, especially for Asian people. So several people told us that the suspicion is that these people who were posing as, or who were acting as bank employees might have been paid actors who potentially were also sitting in mock-up bank branches.
Oh my God.
Might have been paid by the mastermind of the fraud.
All kind of fell apart on June 16th and the subsequent days thereafter. How has FT been, and what is where do you all sit in kind of in the aftermath of this?
I think the FT's key role, and that this is Dan's and Dan McCrum's and Paul Murphy's work, so my colleagues in London, the key role is basically to get access to the whistleblowers, dig through these tons of documents, find the inconsistencies in the accounting, and basically raise these questions, which then triggered the KPMG investigation, which then triggered EY to take much closer looks than they did in previous years into this. And I mean, afterwards we did quite a lot of reporting about how, I mean, for instance, EY even in early June was signaling to Wirecard that they were preparing an unqualified all clear audit, provided Wirecard would meet certain conditions. And other stuff. But the key role was basically Dan's and Paul's work in the run up to the KPMG investigation.
I had heard from someone that Dan was offered, or someone, I don't know if it was Dan necessarily, but someone was offered some money to keep the story quiet. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, Paul Murphy, the head of the investigative unit in London, was basically approached or heard by somebody from within the London short selling scene that people were willing to pay him money to basically stop the reporting. What happened then was basically a meeting between Paul and some other colleagues. Paul was totally wired up, so everything was recorded, with Jan Marsalek and some other people working for Marsalek at a restaurant in London.
Wow.
But they never, Wirecard or Marsalek never actually made this offer by himself. So it's in theory it might be possible that this was that this middleman who approached Paul was basically making it up, or potentially Marsalek, that was a trap and trying to basically make Paul ask for it, which he didn't, and then basically leak the recordings to somebody, trying to set a trap to implicate the FT. That's not quite clear, but there was quite a lot of really unbelievable stuff going on.
Yeah, to say the least.
The run up to this, yeah.
Absolutely. And so, where does Wirecard sit now?
Well, I mean, it's insolvent. They are sitting on 3.2 billion of debt.
Wow.
Most of this will be lost. The administrator at the moment estimates that the Wirecard assets are just worth about 400 million.
Oh my God.
So, and all the creditors basically brace themselves for significant losses. The administrator is trying to sell the good part of Wirecard. They conclude early on that it's impossible to basically restructure the entity as it is. They've sold the first bit. They've sold operations in Brazil. They've sold assets in the UK, but and negotiations about selling Wirecard Bank and other units are ongoing. But it's pretty clear that what they will the cash they will get from these divestments will be nothing close to the debt Wirecard has accumulated.
Maybe Deutsche Bank will buy it.
Actually, Deutsche Bank was looking to buy into buying Wirecard Bank, but they walked back from this idea, and they've hired a few people from Wirecard, but who people working on in the legitimate part of the business, I have to say. So not, because I mean, payment is an interesting business in itself, electronic payment, with the use of cash going down and electronic payment becoming ever more important. And it's an area where Deutsche Bank wants to grow, which is probably strategically not a totally idiotic idea. And Deutsche looked into buying Wirecard Bank, but decided against it.
Well, this is an amazing story, and congratulations for all the work that you've done on uncovering this. I'm sure for you and your colleagues, this is one of the stories of your career that you will remember most. Well, is there anything else that you can think of, Olaf?
I think we've covered basically most of the important aspects. I mean, we could talk for a day and not touch all of the interesting and funny aspects, but I think we've covered the most important bits and the most hair-raising ones.
Yeah, I would love to get into an off-the-record conversation sometime about who Chris Bauer became, where Marsalek is hiding, and all these more kind of salacious stuff sometime. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your time, and really appreciate you talking with us today. This is just an amazing story.
I hope it was useful. Maybe a little bit. I mean, it's such a complex story. It's difficult to describe it even in 1.5 hours.
No. You know what? For people who don't understand that, too bad for them. They'll have to go read a book. Anyways, thanks again, and have a good one.
Okay, cheers.
Cheers, bye-bye.